All right, welcome to today's webinar. This is one of the many content pieces that Active Prospect is putting together in the weeks and months ahead as we help the lead generation and performance marketing industry navigate the most recent FCC update to the rules in the TCPA, or the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. This update was dropped in December, and we believe the content we're putting together here is going to help you decode these changes with more confidence and focused on some key compliance topics. So today we're going to be digging in further around the new term and the language around consumer calls and texts needing to be logical and topical related to a website. So a lot to unpack there. A few items for housekeeping before we get started. In our webinar platform, there is a chat icon and there is a questions icon. That's on the top right side. Please use the chat section for general content, comments, and interactions with other participants. And please use the question section if there's a question that you would like to pose to us. We're going to leave time at the end to review and respond to some of these questions, but we'll do our best to keep track of the questions there and maybe be able to provide some quick answers during the session. Also note the live recording will be emailed out tomorrow to all participants and then will exist here, I believe, on this webpage for future reference by everyone. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm Benjamin Farah. I'm the Director of Privacy, Security, and Compliance at Active Prospect. A little bit about me. For the last 10 years, I've worked for companies in the performance marketing space and market research space, including WPP Kantar, Dentsu, with much focus on privacy regulations compliance during that time. Prior to that, I worked as an external auditor at Ernst & Young in New York, serving financial service clients, testing IT and security controls such as SOC and Sarbanes-Oxley. Also worked in Ernst & Young's internal compliance function, right? So helping them build out their compliance program for privacy. And before that, I got my start in the healthcare industry at Ochsner Clinic Hospital in New Orleans as an IT auditor at that time, where they passed the first HIPAA security rules. All of my roles have been in legal, compliance, privacy, IT security functions or departments. And I share this because there's two major themes that have connected all of my professional experiences together. One, I'm very fortunate to have worked with great leaders. I've learned a lot from people and really smart colleagues throughout my career. And number two, the most relevant for the discussion today, in each one of these industries and jobs, a significant data regulation or law was passed during my time there. And I had the good fortune, or the eternal deja vu, of being on the team that was responsible for translating these, reviewing them, seeking clarity, and then establishing a compliance program for us to work within these rules. So things like HIPAA, SOX, GDPR, CCPA, state and country data laws. Today, we're gathered around here to discuss the new rules in the FCC, update to the TCPA. And for now, for another introduction, I'd like to hand it over to our subject matter expert here today as well, Craig Ready, General Counsel from Launch Potato.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Craig. I am General Counsel at Launch Potato, which is a very funny name for a company. But we are a digital media and conversion company. We have owned and operated websites that provide content and experiences for users, and we connect them with products and services that they are interested in. So a couple of examples are financebuzz.com, all about cookies, and we're also in the prizes and games sector as well. So very happy to be joining you all today. I've been at Launch Potato for almost a year as General Counsel. Before that, I was at a couple of other digital media companies, including Red Ventures, and I've had a lot of my career involved in consumer finance industry. So happy to be here with you all today and excited to talk about the FCC rule on TCPA consent. And as Ben mentioned, when you're in this part of the industry, anything related to privacy, security, it is never a dull moment, and I don't think it will be for the foreseeable future. So excited to dig into this with you all today.
Great. Thanks, Craig. So let's start a little bit with why are we here? What's the reason for this update? What happened for those that haven't been following the play-by-play from the middle of last year and then the December till the last couple of weeks? Tell us what happened and why we're here.
Yeah. So at the beginning of 2023, the FCC tipped its hand that there was going to be a large update on TCPA consent. They started taking comments, and a couple of the industry players on the consumer side asked the FCC to close what they call the lead generator loophole, which they have complained about for some time now, where a company can gain TCPA consent to call a consumer and also sort of sell that lead to a lot of its other marketing partners. And oftentimes this would come in the form of language on a contact submit form, and it would have a link to marketing partners. And that link could sometimes contain 10 or 20 companies, and in cases of others, it could contain hundreds, or there's a couple of examples at the FCC sites that contain thousands of marketing partners. And so a consumer submits their information, that lead gets sent to the lead generator, lead aggregator, and then sold around the ecosystem. So that's one example that the consumer side had in its mind when it requested the FCC to look into this, and it's sort of what the FCC had in its mind. So it was no surprise that we landed where we landed, which happened. We all got a nice holiday gift right around Thanksgiving when the FCC finalized its proposal, and it did two things essentially. The first is to make consent one-to-one. So as the model I just described, where a consumer can submit their information once and that be sort of sent around the ecosystem, that will no longer be allowed. It will be one-to-one consent. So the company who is going to call the consumer has to be listed on the lead form in clear and conspicuous language, sort of the other TCPA language that you might be used to, alongside of the name of the company that is going to be making the call. So it has to be one-to-one. It can't be marketing partners link anymore, or just multiple entities listed in a row. If that's what you had been doing, has to be clear and conspicuous. And there's some language in the commentary that indicates it needs to be sort of separate pieces where each company is mentioned, and the consumer would take some sort of opt-in action to agree for each company listed there to reach out to them. So
yeah, and the part of the comments around that was, or the negative association with against, or actions from the FTC against consent forms, right? One site listing a bunch of partners, a consumer landing on that site, entering information, and then you didn't know where that information would go beyond that. They referred to that unaffectionately as a consent form. First time I heard that concept, but it makes sense, or the parallels. And then all of this, of course, relates to outbound outreach, and calling and texting was also added to the recent piece there. So
yeah, it's clear. It was clear before, but it's even more clear somehow now that texting is part of this. And just to step back for a second, this applies to outbound marketing calls that's done with regulated technology, which is defined as an auto dialer, or if you're making pre-recorded or artificial voice calls. So that's the scope of what's happening here. We talked about the first thing that the new rule does is one-to-one consent. The second thing is it adds this layer of logical and topical related. So and if you want to, we can go ahead and pull up the actual language of the rules so we can go through it here.
Yeah. Let's dig into the language a little bit. Like I said, I caution everyone, compliance and legal folks are on the call. There will be text on screen. So here you go.
Yeah, what we thought it would be good to just have the language here and highlight the sort of new parts of the rule to show you, one, just how much adding a few words to a already verbose regulation can just sort of change the entire industry. And two, it's just good to sort of go right to the source, right? So the first highlighted section, that says that clearly and conspicuously authorizes no more than one identified seller, right? And then the next section that's highlighted, calls and texts must be logically and topically associated with the interaction that prompted the consent, right? So that's totally clear to everyone, right? Everyone knows exactly what that means.
Not so much, Craig. I don't think so.
One of the upshots of the language being worded this way is I have to think something happened at the FCC, because this language in the rule is very different than the commentary. And to sort of take a step back here, remember the TCPA, it is enforced by the FCC. But what really happens here is it's really enforced by the plaintiff's class action bar. Unlike the FTC, which the regulations around the FTC, which is enforced by the FTC, there's no private rights of action around the telemarketing sales rule, for example. The TCPA is essentially enforced by the plaintiff's bar. And there's also, having been in this world for a while, there's not a lot of great insurance coverage for TCPA claims. So what happens is something like this comes out, which is ambiguous. And the language around logical and topical association, for example, is somewhat ambiguous. And you're going to see sort of a feeding frenzy from some of the plaintiffs' bar to really dig in and it sort of take the mantle from the FCC and enforce this through class action lawsuits. That's what's going to happen. So just as a reminder of like why we're here, the FCC wanted to close the lead generator loophole. This is how, and the instinct here is, I think, one that most of us can agree on, right? I think it's a bipartisan issue that people hate robocalls, but they've sort of taken a large weapon here where a scalpel might have done better, and they've added language that is going to be difficult for a lot of companies to deal with, which is why we're all here talking about it today.
Yeah. We'll unpack that. And this, for others, this is in Appendix B at section, so it's in the final rules section if you want to refer to that as well. Also want to note, logical and topical is mentioned 9 times in the order, so you can search and reference those and get the different context. But
we'll actually talk about it here too, Ben. So this is the language in the actual rule that's going to be, what actually gets, fought over in courts and when the FCC actually enforces it. But the commentary is important because that's the language that the plaintiff's bar will use in their complaints because of how different it is. So just to back up for 1 second on going back to one-to-one consent, we can hit that for just a second. So how I think this will play out, and how I think we should say that this is sort of where things have been pointing toward for a while. If you look at what the FTC has done, they've had a few enforcement actions around the telemarketing sales rule that have essentially pointed everyone that one-to-one consent was coming. And I think, some of the business models have started to shift in this direction too. So how I see this working out, many of you are probably familiar with cookie banners. If you've ever been to Europe, they're slightly different than they are here. In Europe, because of the privacy regulation that they have there, they actually have a cookie banner that sort of forces you to pick different companies that you're okay with your cookie data being sent to. And I think there's going to be a similar thing here on consent forms, that there's going to be sort of this opt-in checkbox for different companies to contact you. And I think like there's going to be a real sense of creating different experiences and funnels for customers that will you'll ask for their consent at different parts in their journey throughout your website versus it always being in the same spot, or versus it, sort of always looking the exact same way. So I think there, while this regulation is going to be very frustrating for a lot of businesses, I think it will also spur a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation in the area. And so let's move on to the next slide real quick and talk about the different types of models that the rule will impact. So again, we're talking about outbound marketing leads using an auto dialer or pre-recorded artificial voice calls. This also means, IVRs, soundboards, etc. This is going to impact multi-vertical leads because of the logical and topical piece that we'll get into more. It's going to impact ping post models, which, you go to a funnel for, let's say, an auto insurance quote like we have on Finance Buzz. You answer a few questions, and depending on how you answer those questions, a company will sort of bid on whether they want to buy your lead, and then you consent to a company calling you. The company bids on the lead, and then they will reach out if they want to contact you. And I think, Ben, you all actually just talked about ping posts and how some of this may be changing. So if you want to mention that real quick.
Yeah, sure. So at Active Prospect, we've been observing that, and we've put forward, something called ping pick post. So it's where we see the industry heading. This is the way that those types of sites would need to, if you're presenting a landing spot and then multiple offers. This is our model of what we're suggesting and thinking the industry needs to move to. If you'd like to learn more about that, please click on the link in the chat. You can also just search ping pick post on Google. It's going to land on our page. And we encourage everyone to take a look, share some feedback. We want to help the industry. This is what we're putting forward. We think this is very workable, but we want to make sure everyone takes a look at this and gives us their critique and feedback. There's also a feedback button on that form as well. You can provide input there, or then reach out to us, and we're happy to have further discussions. But that was our proposal to help make that comparison site model still continue, not full stop, full breaks. It's just a variation in the way it would be presented, and the individual does pick. So there is a one-to-one consent where they would choose where they want their data to be shared.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example of, where things will sort of evolve in light of this is, if I know anything about salespeople, account managers, business leaders, they're endlessly creative. And they will find ways to make their business model work in light of the rule. So the other area that this really impacts is sort of a traditional co-reg model on like sweepstakes, for example. So Launch Potato has a site called prizegrab.com, which is a traditional sort of sweepstakes. You sign up, you give some information, you're taken through a survey flow where you answer some questions, and then certain questions are essentially advertisements for you to either you can either move on and sort of skip that question, or you can answer yes, and then the company that's advertising will reach out to you. So we've sort of moved toward this one-to-one model, in advance of the FCC rule, and we're seeing higher quality and intent in our leads, the ability to charge more for the leads, which I think would be, sort of a natural upshot of this is that if, let's say your thesis is that this is going to impact volume, then if the volume shrinks, then, it's also a sort of logical thesis to add that perhaps quality goes up, perhaps intent goes up, and if quality goes up, you can charge more for your leads. And so we've seen some signals of that already at Launch Potato in our models. But The other way this impacts co-reg is if you have a sweepstakes site, and what we'll get into with logical and topical, can you only have, you know, sweepstakes related companies advertise on your site? Can it be other kinds of companies that aren't related to that? Like that's sort of the question that we're all having to grapple with.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of what if scenarios with everyone sort of saying, what about this potential model? What do you think of this? It is a little bit of a show and tell, and I hear that at shows and conversations around that, and we'll go a little bit into that. I do see some of the chats. Of course, the questions were coming up asking about what about if I'm doing manual dialing, or does this impact manual dialing?
Right.
I mean, the short answer is no, but the other part is that are you really not using ATDS or the dialing systems? Sometimes that's subject to, you may be surprised and consider that it is considered ATDS. So that's sort of the thing of yes, if you're doing true manual dialing, but what is that as opposed to using technology? So that's the part you don't want to feel too comfortable with. But as a side piece, I mean, the answer to that is
and it's a good point to maybe talk for a second about what are some alternatives, right? So like if we're talking about the scope of this being outbound marketing calls using an auto dialer and pre-recorded artificial voice, you know, I think you're going to see a big shift toward inbound calls. Right. This happened on certain health insurance verticals when there was like a 48-hour waiting period put in place. A lot of these companies shifted toward inbound calling, and it's done something similar. So it's reduced the volume, but people who are calling in, there's higher intent, and so the conversion rate might be better even if the volume is lower, and the quality might be better overall. So I think you're going to see a shift in some cases toward inbound calling. I think you're going to see a shift toward more efficient email marketing channels. I think you're going to see a shift toward BPO services and maybe like white labeling websites where instead of being a separate independent lead generator, maybe you're a service provider for the company, so you can make calls on behalf of the company instead of your own lead aggregation business. So more of a services bent. Overall, I think the theme here is there's probably going to have to be a multimodal approach to dealing with this, depending on the business that you're in. If you're sort of a one-trick pony doing outbound marketing calls with an auto dialer or pre-recorded, you know, I think you're going to have to maybe rethink your channels and rethink some of your strategies on how to deal with this. So that's sort of my overall theme to working through this is it's going to have to be like a multi-pronged strategy.
And then do be careful with inbound calls. If something happens during the call, you do not have permission or consent to call the individual back or start communicating in that regard. So that's being very careful with those inbound calls, and then don't certainly flip it to outbound, no matter how excited it seemed like they were interested in that. That could be a gotcha for you to watch out for.
Yeah. Just a quick thing on the mechanics of the rule. One of the pieces that happened in the whole rulemaking process is that the Small Business Administration, which is also a federal agency, basically wrote a letter to the FCC and said, we don't think you really consider the impact that this rule is going to have on small businesses. So can you please, you know, think about that? So the FCC in its most recent publication opened back up the comment period that will the deadline to respond is February 1st. So if you're a small business and you're interested in letting the FCC know what you think about this rule and how it's going to impact your business, I encourage you to reach out to them. We can try to post a link to what, you know, where you would go to do that. It's not a super complicated process. It can be a very informal thing if you want it to be. A lot of times, like formal comments, companies will hire, you know, a law firm, pay thousands of dollars for them to comment, but it doesn't have to be that. I think they just want to hear from sort of your average small business owner on how, you know, is this going to be harder for you to buy leads, for example, right? Like, let's say you're in a universe of 10 companies that the consumer could click on to call. if they've never heard of your business because you're a small business in one area, for example, and you're competing with very well-known companies, is it going to be harder for you to buy leads, right? So they want to know things like that. They want to know if it's going to be harder for you to compete with bigger businesses, if you think you're not going to be able to buy leads, et cetera. So I'd encourage you to let them know what you think.
Yeah, and that same bureau was also tapped to provide compliance guidance in the weeks and months ahead coming out of this. There is a 12-month period for implementation that's going to start at some determined date in the near future. The 12-month period will start. And so those comments can also help them identify what is it that small businesses are not comfortable with, and what needs more clarity, or what's more concerning around that, to potentially offer some guidance and communications in what they have going forward.
Yeah, so we think the effective date of the rule, there's not an exact date yet, but it's going to be sometime mid to late Q1 of 2025. And you may hear that and think like, oh, I've got a year. Why is everybody freaking out about this? And could this just go away if there's a new administration, for example? A couple things. One is that the rule is being challenged. There's at least one coalition that is going to challenge the rule. I can't handicap how successful I think it's going to be. I think it's got a decent chance of success, but I don't think anybody should count on that. Nor should you use the 12 months to sort of chill until you get a couple months before and then change. The companies that I've talked to, my colleagues at other companies, and the way we're approaching it is planning now and starting to A/B test, as soon as possible on how what are the most successful ways to implement this. Because if you wait, it's going to be tough out the gate. So I would encourage all of you who have the capability and who can to start really figuring this out now, and don't count on a lawsuit or a change in administration to sort of save you here. This is where the industry, where the models are moving, because of consumer advocacy groups and because of the way that dovetails with a lot of privacy laws. People want more control over their data and more control over who reaches out to them, like actioning off of their data. So this is where the world is going. Even if it's not this exact rule, there's going to be some version of this, regardless of which administration is in power. So
yeah, and a good strategy for data regulations that have a similar window, such as this, like if it's 12 months, you'd say, well, for the first 6 months, we're going to be creative, looking at some variations, testing things. What can we do to that we think will comply with the spirit of it? What are the deeper questions that we have? And then the remaining 6 months testing to more fully verify what you think is really gonna work or not work. But yeah, it's not wait till month 11 and then start making some changes. It's studying it now. Think about the changes that you need to make to your business model and platform and pathways, and then doing some testing. And it's really great that you all at Launch Potato were aware of that one-to-one consent piece earlier, or saw the horizon as that was coming, and then made changes earlier on and then, because I could see that concern of saying, well, what if volume drops? I mean, isn't this just cataclysmic? And the answer is like, actually, no. The lights continue to turn on. There's different ways, and focus on better quality, higher lead value returns. So that's good to hear that you all were doing that, and I wanted to make sure that the industry recognizes that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to downplay anyone's concern, right? I mean, lower volume is a concern for sure, and there will be some businesses that have a hard time transitioning their models and making this work. So I certainly don't want to downplay it and try to spin this as that it's all going to be roses or anything. It's going to be difficult for a lot of businesses, but again, I am optimistic given just what I know about the the industry and the creativity and entrepreneurialism of so many of you on this call and others that I know in my network to really figure this out and figure out a way to make it work. So I'm confident that there will be some, emerging technology or some way to deal with this on a much larger scale, whether that's figuring out getting some sort of like technology around an auto dialer, like being 100% or as close to 100% certain as you can that what you're using is not an auto dialer, for example, or the sort of multimodal approach that I mentioned of, sort of in this particular area, scaling up your email marketing strategy, or in this one, working through inbound calls, or this other one, doing something different there, having different kinds of funnel strategies or experiences where, when you're on one piece of content, for example, on your site, you get consent around that. And maybe when you're on another, you have already had that information. You can ask the consumer to sort of reconfirm that this is the right information. And, oh, by the way, you're on this other piece of content that's not related, but like, would you like this company to reach out to you? Where it doesn't all have to be in just like this one narrow area. So I think there's going to be a lot of innovation and creativity around this. So.
Yeah. Now let's unpack a little bit more the logical and topical term that's in there as well.
Yeah, this is to my eye, when the rule first came out, I think a lot of people were really freaking out about the one-to-one consent piece, and I totally understand that. But when I started reading the commentary and then I got to this part, this was what stood out to me the most because of the lack of clarity. The one-to-one consent is, like I said, going to be difficult for some businesses to implement, but at least it's pretty clear overall what that means. And so the interface might be different. The exactly how you do it may be different company to company, but overall the concept is pretty clear. This is a hot mess to me because logical and topical is very messy because, again, let me just read the rule and then we'll talk about this slide. So the rule again says calls and texts must be logically and topically associated with the interaction that prompted the consent. Okay, so that's the rule. Here's the commentary. Robotexts and robocalls that result from consumer consent obtained on comparison websites must be logically and topically related to that website. Okay, so we've got interaction in the rule. We've got language here that suggests purpose is what matters. So again, down at the bottom, the next paragraph in this slide says a consumer giving consent, for example, on a car loan comparison shopping website does not consent about loan consolidation, which I would argue is pretty close to, someone who's shopping for an auto loan might also be interested in, loan consolidation. But just a sentence or two down, they talk about the scope of consent, which can be reasonably inferred from the purpose of the website. Okay, so we've got interaction in the rule. We've got purpose here. Okay, then go to the next one. Then we have in the appendix, they say the seller must be logically and topically related to the content of the website. We've got purpose, content, and interaction. Okay. Ben, can you explain this real quick for everybody? Because this is super clear.
Not so clear. No, there's definitely a haze lingering around this. Yeah, it was it three different writers? How did it end up in the final writing of that? Just sort of jumbled together? No, it's not abundantly clear. For sure.
Right. So let's try to tackle this together. Let's go back to the previous slide. So how I think about this, approaching this with a framework is, okay, so we have the rule that talks about the interaction that prompted the consent. To me, that is the most broad of the three that we just talked about. It doesn't talk about the purpose of the website. It doesn't talk about the content of the website. It's the interaction that prompted the consent. So,
okay, yeah.
So I think overall of the three, that's probably the best one to end up in the rule, because you can read, even though it's still fuzzy, you can read it broadly-ish to say, you know, if the disclosure to the consumer is clear and conspicuous, if again it's one-to-one, and it's a so let me choose an example. So if you're on a sweeps website flow, right? You're on a sweeps site. Let's say it's a single purpose site, which is, you know, I think not always clear either, but single purpose site, like a sweeps website. And you're going through a survey question. The survey questions themselves aren't really related to the purpose of the sweeps, but you're in this flow and it's asking you questions about your life. Like, do you have health insurance? Do you, are you over 65? And then you get to a question that says, would you like for XYZ Medicare company to reach out to you to talk to you about Medicare offers? I would argue the interaction there that prompted the consent is logically and topically, like there is a logical and topical relation to the interaction that prompted the consent. They'd been asking you that you had one or two questions about your health status, your age, and then whether you're interested in insurance. So that's not related to the purpose of the site, but it is related to the interaction that prompted the consent, because you've answered these questions. It's very clear, right? Before the person clicks, yes, please call me, or I agree, or you know, whatever we're gonna use in this hypothetical example to sort of agree that the company can call you. All the language is there. You know, yes, I want XYZ company to call me about Medicare insurance at such and such number, and you have all the other required disclosures there. I would argue that that's logically and topically related to the interaction that prompted the consent. And then if you move on to other parts of the survey that lead in with other types of questions that are in other areas, I think you have an argument there, right? But again, you have an argument. This is not ironclad, unfortunately. But again, what's in the rule is, to me, the most broad reading of the three. Now, of course, the problem is, right, that we've got this language in the commentary. And that's the stuff that the plaintiff's bar is going to use to say, hey, the FCC even gave you this example of an auto loan, you know, and then a loan consolidation, right? But you're going to have to keep going back to the rule. Yes, they did say that in the commentary, but that's not what they wrote in the rule. They wrote in the rule about the interaction that prompts the consent, right? So that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it in this example, I mentioned this briefly earlier, but I think you will start to see some companies think through their actual sort of the purpose of their website. So one way to deal with it is we just talked about, you really deconstruct the language of the rule itself. You rely on that, and you rely on good arguments. Another way is you do that, plus you sort of rethink your content strategy around your website. We talked about in that last slide, the very last one, we saw the consent is logically and topically related to the content of the website, which the consent is obtained. So instead of having content on your, like, again, let's use a sweeps example. Let's say you have a section of the sweeps website that's dedicated to talking about health insurance or some other area that is not sweeps related. Then you have an argument that the interaction prompted and that you have a logical and topical relation to the content of the website, because you do have content. It's not the only content, but again, like that assumes that every website has one single purpose. And I think we all know that that is very rare, if it happens at all. And that's part of what is the flaw in the FCC's commentary here, is they're sort of assuming that there is one purpose for every website, and that this is just a very obvious thing, right? So you may be wondering, like, well, hey, guys, just show me where they define logical and topical, right? Great question. They explicitly declined to do that.
Yeah.
They said, we think you're all capable of figuring this out on your own. And you know what? If it is unclear, we know you'll just land on the side that is reasonable, right? Of course, what's reasonable? People can differ.
Yeah.
So that's another strategy. So strategy one is you focus solely on the rule, which is the broadest of everything that's in the order, in the commentary in the rule. You make your arguments there. Strategy two is strategy one plus you think about the content on your site and you diversify the content on your site so that you've got an argument that there's logical and topical relation to the content of the site on which the consent is obtained. And kind of related, we've got this slide up here that talks about the purpose of the website. You want to, the other strategies you could think of, do we think about explicitly diversifying like the purposes of the site? So let's say we had a sweep site that, and I'll use an example at LaunchPad, we have one called Prize Grab. Do we change that site to be prizegrabplus.com, right? Where it is not, or prizes plus, or some other name that indicates like we've got a multi sort of vertical content strategy here that attracts eyeballs on these different types of content, and that we gain consent on sort of those different pieces of content that are related to that topic, or that that we have a good argument are logically and topically related to the purpose, the content, the interaction, right? So there are ways you can sort of think through this problem that, you know, that is very muddy. But of course, like, this is all a question of like what your risk appetite is. It's all a question of, you know, how confident you feel if you were to encounter a class action lawsuit, and how much you'd be willing to fight that. And so if you're going to continue to do these outbound marketing calls using an auto dialer, artificial pre-recorded voice, you've got to find a way to deal with the logical and topical piece. And so those couple of strategies we just talked through, I think, are ways you can start to think through that problem. But again, like, that's one part of the problem, right? That's one part of the issue to think through. And the others that we've already talked about are these different kinds of approaches, like inbound email strategy, and sort of these other technology solutions that I think will emerge. So sorry, Ben, you're about to cut in.
Yeah. So my margin notes from that is, you know, key highlights of, you know, those that are focused on compliance and coming up with strategies to deal with this. You're going to want to think about the term interaction when you look at your property. You're going to try to, what does that mean? Is it a single purpose site? Probably not, but you might even want to start with that piece. What's the purpose? What's the content associated with it? And getting that closer than just spinning up a web property, where before was trying to get the funnel as quickly as possible and gather interested eyes to pass the data on. It's getting closer to defining those pieces and then holding those up and saying, do we need to make minor changes or major changes to this to make this abundantly clear? And it ends up being what puts you in the best defensible position if asked. Like, are you really ready to defend it, or absolutely stand up and say, yes, our site is logically and topically, the content is related to this because of this, this, and this, and this, and you feel comfortable with that, and there's not super or holes that someone can't drive a truck through. that would put you in a good position from a compliance standpoint, since it is not exactly defined what logical and topical means, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think this is going to require us all to rethink some of these funnel type of strategies. So, as an example, instead of waiting till the end to collect someone's contact information, maybe being more upfront in doing that. And then when they're on a piece of content that is related to a company that that is an advertiser that may be interested in calling them, or that they might have, instead of having to go through the whole thing and collect you already have it. So you can sort of pop up and say, hey, would you be interested in XYZ company calling you? Right. They're even, I think, going to be, in this sort of new world. Let's say you're going to have a traditional funnel where at the end the consumer clicks a button or a check mark that says, yes, XYZ company can call me. And let's say there's going to be options for 4 or 5 other companies there. I can see a world where, ABC company has a dash or a little explanatory note next to it that says ABC company is, and you sort of explain who they are in the quick, 10 words or less, where, maybe that's how sort of the small business piece gets solved, or maybe not solved, but at least gets mitigated. So maybe so-and-so's never heard of ABC company because they're a small business, but they've got a valuable product or service that they could help the consumer with. So ABC company is your local mortgage broker, that can help you with, specific types of loans, right? Certain types of loans. So I think there's going to be just this explosion of figuring out different types of experiences to get consumers into that will, meet your goal of conversion, being able to buy and sell leads, while also not exposing you to too much risk on this new TCPA rule, because it's going to be tricky to balance. But again, I'm pretty confident that the collective brain power in the industry will be able to figure this out.
Yeah, and start thinking from a consumer's perspective first. I mean, they are first. We can't do what we do without them willing to participate and visiting the site for finding sites and services. So don't put them more upfront in the front seat if you're thinking of how you're designing your website and flows, and transparent. I mean, be as transparent as you can. Some key takeaways. Make sure you're moving towards one-to-one consent. Review and update your notice and consent language. There's going to be changes for that in the coming months. Document your consent transaction. I'd say with Trusted Form Certify, that's certainly going to put you in start to improve your position. Claim the Trusted Form Certificate for record-keeping purposes. And then brands, or as FCC calls them, sellers, you need to have a Trusted Form Certificate as well. Lead sellers, lead buyers, it's going to make all the sense in the world to capture that consent transaction of exactly what happened. And an active prospect, we can do that with our Trusted Form product. So we are getting near the end of our time. Let's see if we can hop into a few questions. Okay. Yeah. Can a customer opt into more than one company to contact them? Have you seen that framed? Yeah, that's seen that before.
Yeah. The answer there is yes. The FCC was pretty explicit that you can opt into more than one. But I think how this is going to ultimately look will be there will be different UX, UI considerations, but I can envision sort of the sort of typical TCPA language, a blank checkbox next to a company, and the consumer checking that one, and then looking, scrolling down and seeing another, checking that one, and so forth. Again, assuming that you're comfortable with your logical and topical, that, let's say that company 1 is, auto loan company 2 is another auto loan company, right? Given the example we talked about, but yes, you can opt into more than one.
And do you think having multiple sites to help generate leads would be a good focus to show consumers, business owners, they go to multiple sites for money or for products or services? I mean, that's one of the considerations you were putting out there. Something to think about, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. That's I think going to be one strategy that some businesses take, is to sort of either build out single purpose sites, or to sort of take the opposite tack and like make multi-purpose content kind of sites, where you can have the argument then that like, hey, there are many purposes to this site, and the interaction that prompted the consent was logically and topically related, because we talk about all kinds of things on this site, and also the consumer opted in to understanding that, like, yes, they wanted an auto loan company to reach out, and then right below that we explained loan consolidation company number one also would like to call you. Do you want them to call you? Yes, because they are pretty, in my opinion, they're pretty closely related, but it was also very clear to the customer that that's who was going to call them, right? It wasn't opaque to them.
Mm-hmm. What if a company listed 5 companies at the bottom of the form that are checked? I guess they're saying, well, first, let's get out of pre-check boxes. That's going to be a clear no. And that might have been the intention of the question. So no pre-check box, anything that you're doing. Would you be able to list those 5 companies to see who's calling? I think the answer is as long as there's a one-to-one transaction, multiple could be picked, but the consumer has to make the choice with those individually, right?
Yeah. The days of pre-checked boxes, they should have been gone a while ago, but they are done. There's no world in which a pre-checked box would meet the requirements of this rule.
Yes, right. That's you stubbing your toe before you're getting started in the morning on that one. If you could design some really great things after that, but if someone has pre-checked the boxes before that, you may have introduced something right issue right from the beginning. Any other questions? I know you talked about it, but the reduction in volume, but increase in quality. Anything that you want to mention from experiences at Launch Potato, or just your your experiences as y'all were addressing that and dealing with it?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it briefly about Launch Potato, but I should also mention, another company I was at called Red Ventures. We owned and operated consumer sort of comparison sites around personal finance. And as a point of comparison, companies like, call it Lending Tree, NerdWallet, they have a model currently where you go and you submit one form, and it's kind of the model we've talked about, and it gets sort of pinged out to lots of different companies, and you can get calls from 10 to 15, let's say, mortgage lenders. A company I was at Red Ventures, within Red Ventures, basically had the one-to-one model years ago, and so we didn't, there's a whole other sort of separate question on the mortgage side there with a different regulation. But we found that one-to-one, we did very well. I'll put it that way. And that's because the advertisers were willing to pay more for that lead, because they weren't competing against 10 or 15 other companies. So when the consumer went through the lead flow and at the end selected the lender that they wanted to call them, that lender had that at bat to talk to that consumer without the pressure of being the first to call, without the pressure of having to close it right away, because they knew the consumer would get bombarded with calls. And so the advertiser there, they were willing to pay a lot for those leads. And that vertical that I worked on within Red Ventures did quite well. So I know the business model can work. If you build the audience, you get the eyeballs there, they know what to expect. you've got great content.
Mhm.
You've got really quality advertisers. Consumers will pick them, and you will be able to charge more because conversion will go up, quality does go up. Like I've seen it work. So I know that it can. It's difficult to build, but it's doable.
Okay. And so today, sort of unpacking the logical and topical discussion. Anything closing around that topic? It's I hope we offered input that you all understand that it's not completely clear. If you read it, you say, well, this isn't clear. So you're not alone in that, but we're giving you some suggested solutions because it won't significantly be clarified, but giving you some of the rough tools so that you can make more informed business decisions about what models you need to change and put you in the best position to consider those and have those good discussions. And don't just hope and wait that it's going to be significantly clarified. This is what you have. You have a long runway to test this out and look at it, but start having those discussions and thinking about it today.
Yeah, if you haven't talked, if you don't have legal counsel to help you with this, I recommend that you get legal counsel. If you do have legal counsel and you haven't started talking to them about this, you definitely should. The goal here was to basically do some troubleshooting, brainstorming with you all to give you some ideas that could maybe germinate a little bit, and help you start to think through how to solve this issue, because it is going to be tricky. There's unfortunately going to be, this is going to get clarified over the course of a couple of class actions. This is going to be a tough area. And you can, like we said, there are strategies that you can use to, if you really want almost no risk, you can go one way. If you're comfortable with some risk, you can implement some of the strategies we talked about. And if you're really comfortable with risk, you can rely on, making the argument just from the rule and the interaction piece that we discussed. So it depends on where you're comfortable, and what your risk profile is, and sort of where you want to land on that front. But there are solutions. I think there will be more solutions that occur, and that as we all think through this more and brainstorm over the next year, I think there will be more to talk about here, and hopefully we can all sort of work on solving this together.
Yeah, that's great. There's a real entrepreneurial spirit in this industry. And if you look at it more opportunistically, this is a great an opportunity to rethink things. If there's some things that we wanted to change, to be more upfront with the consumer, it's a good opportunity to lean in. Want to encourage everyone who's in the comparison site space, take a look at PingPick posts on activeprospect.com. The visuals there are great. I think it explains it really well, but we're open to feedback and want to hear from you. And thank you all for attending. And we're going to continue to put together really great content, really relevant webinars, invite other subject matter experts here to talk in the weeks and months ahead. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you with more content soon. Thanks. And thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everyone.